As in Utah, when I was born, that's where we were. We were the anti-nuclear capital of the world. I was an autistic kid. My father was a drafted United States Marine, an incredible man. I come from an incredible family. My uncle stood on Omaha Beach on D-Day. I grew up on a huge ranch out by the lake. He was a beautiful, incredible person. He was at Pendleton, combat ready, and they were human guinea pig. They were marched into the trenches in Nevada. They're called atomic veterans. He nearly died at the blast. Between 1951 and 1968, we had 300 open-air tests. Well, as different scientists started to write about this, Wallace Stegner was at the University of Utah at the time. I got to know him. Edward Abbey was hanging around there. I got to know him. I got to know all these environmentalists, and I was an environmentalist, and it was a passionate, intense subject matter there.
All nuclear fighters, all hands on deck, all hands on deck, all hands on deck. All nuclear fighters, all hands on deck, all hands on deck, all hands on deck. They'll be calling you a radical. Twingate, 311, whatever you want to call it. I call it Pacific genocide, whatever. It's fucking giant conspiratorial across all demographics. All nuclear fighters, all hands on deck, all hands on deck, all hands on deck. They'll be calling you a radical. All nuclear fighters, all hands on deck, all hands on deck, all hands on deck. Twingate, 311, whatever you want to call it. I call it Pacific genocide, whatever. It's fucking giant conspiratorial across all demographics. They'll be calling you a radical. May God have mercy on all of your souls.
Nuclear power was evolving. We were promised, oh, this can't happen. It will never happen. We cannot have a meltdown.
Hey there, UCY.TV listeners and supporters of the Post-Ignorance Project. This is Lonnie Clark again, and I am filling in for Kevin Blanch, who is out on the California coast documenting the Pacific genocide that is actually going on, irreversible Pacific genocide that the world is beginning to wake up to. I wanted to update you first on where Kevin's at. I think he has, although he's incognito the last day or so I haven't really heard from him. His last plan was to be up in, well, I think he did make it actually up north yesterday. I think I saw a video of his up there. And so he is making his way to San Francisco. I know he's posting up a lot of videos, so he could really use your support. Please do comment on his page. When he checks in, these comments do matter. The support he gets does matter to his morale. He's kind of out there walking alone all by himself. So I would just suggest that you just keep supporting him as much as you can. I wanted to talk to you about a few things today, but first I wanted to get back to you about Captain Higgins' statement that there is not that much plutonium out in the ocean, and that, in fact, they're testing for cesium-137 because that's one of the longest-lived radioactive nuclides that there is out there coming from Fukushima. Well, if anybody who is following this reads the ENE News, which I'm sure many of you do, they said yesterday, the big news yesterday, what was it? The caption says, plutonium-241 from Fukushima nearly 70,000 times more than atomic bomb fallout in Japan. Really? And she's going to tell us that. You know what the half-life of cesium-137 is? 30.17 years. But plutonium, a much more toxic. I mean, I guess, how do you decide what's more toxic, really? What's more toxic? It's all toxic. Plutonium-241 is 14 years. We haven't even hit the half-life of plutonium-241. And they're wondering why we have animals, like what we see even in North Carolina, massive, I am not going to call them die-offs. I'm just going to say it's a genocide. It's not a die-off of animals when we see animals just up on the shore. Like, we had whales, we had sharks, they had seals, they had fish in North Carolina. They had all kinds of species of animals. It is an outrage that they are trying to blow this off as if it's not that big a deal. It's really not. What do they think is going to happen when the fish go away? Who's getting it next? In fact, we are getting it next. We are it. We are on the target list. You know, I mean, I do not comprehend what it's going to take for people to actually get off their asses, phone call, protest in the street. This is actually a worldwide crisis. A worldwide crisis, and we get news about fucking George Zimmerman. It's incomprehensible, the stuff that they shove down our gullet. It is an outrage. I'll be honest, I do not comprehend how people can just, I think I shared this the last time. My friend Jenny said it's just too scary to actually face. The opposite for me is true. If we don't face this is the scary part. If we don't get off our asses now, there is not going to be an earth to save. In fact, there's a whole group of people who think it's probably already too late. I don't think it's too late. I think we can stop this and turn this around and demand that. I think we need to demand truth from science. It's extremely important. Science has just gotten so far. I mean, we're like in the days before in the Dark Ages, before the Enlightenment, before the Renaissance. We've been kicked back 800 or 900 years by the nuclear cartel, by the capitalist cartel, by the bankers, I guess, 100 years ago, who saw it coming and thought, wow, we can make a lot of money. All we have to do is control the populace. What do you think mission accomplished was? Mission accomplished means nobody can do jack about what we've got set up, except comply. Except comply. And you know what? It's up to us to change the trajectory. That is all there is to it. There is no other way. I don't know if any of you continue to listen, but I continue to listen to the symposium from Helen Caldicott's foundation when she was out in New York from February 28th to March 1st. I've listened again twice now to Greg Mello from the Los Alamos Study Group. I'm trying to comprehend how he tries to describe in his segment how deep the corruption is and why the nuclear industry can't learn. I'm not so sure. I think he believes all that, but I actually, I can't comprehend how people can buy into that system consciously. If he can describe that, whoever is inside of that system can actually consciously see their way out. And it is, I guess you do have to be willing to forego the comfort. Like he was describing how they pay these people over $300,000. And then they get super invested in buying a house, and then once they realize how corrupt it is, they can't really leave. That's a false premise. People can leave. I mean, look at Kevin. Kevin's a perfect example. From all accounts and from looking at who he was before he got cancer, he lived quite well. He was used to having money. He didn't have the same attitude about a lot of different things. He may have been hating nuclear and, wanting to change it for a long time, an anti-nuke activist for a super long time. But he was, part of a system, and he's changed his attitude. I know directly he's changed his attitude because he and I have had a lot of conversations about things that just grate on my nerves. And, we have frank conversations. We may be partnered together in the Post-Ignorance Project, but we don't have exactly the same values. I'm from California, and he's from Utah. I mean, even though we're both hardcore liberal progressives, we still have different values. And that leads me into the other thing that is super important for me to discuss, and that is names. I seriously have been throwing this around. Part of what happens with what we call the, quote, anti-nuclear movement, and I really believe this, I've been giving this a lot of thought. Anti-nuclear is a negative affirmation. Whenever you have a negative affirmation, you do not accomplish the task that you want. You get the negative outcome because you're putting it out into the universe, what you want, and if you say a negative thing, it's going to come back to you. That's why positive affirmations are so important. Reframing even the most negative situation is super important, not only for our well-being, but for the trajectory that we're creating in the future. It's not just, I need to be able to feel better, so I need to manage this. No, our thoughts are things. What we think about happens. There was a phrase I learned a long time ago. It says, you're not what you think you are, but what you think you are. I mean, it's really about grammar, I guess, where you put the commas. And this, this business about calling ourselves anti-nukers, look, I'm not actually an anti-nuker if they would have frickin' honest science, but they don't. They have spent the last 70 years twisting like pretzels ever since Goffman and Tamplin told them that this shit is dangerous and nobody should fucking use it until we understand what is going on with it. And that's about as simple as it gets. We need to be able to understand what is happening. And we don't. All we know is the damage. I mean, we know what it's not doing. We know what they're not doing. We know they're not protecting humanity. We know they're using us like fucking lab rats. You know, that book that I'm reading on my YouTube channel, population control through nuclear pollution. Fuck, I bought that book as a joke. I saw it on Amazon for $10.99, and I got it and started reading it. I probably would not have read it as aggressively as I have. I'm kind of a slow reader, as anybody who's following my channel can tell. I don't read very fast, and it probably would have taken me, an extra month to read this book. It's very dry. But, the chapter on nuclear reactors, they basically told Congress, don't build nuclear reactors. They're too dangerous. Did Congress listen? No. We're coming up on the next chapter talking about the spent fuel, the fuel reprocessing plant. In the book written in 1970, he references a company called Nuclear Fuel Services. And let's see, where is it out of? It's out of New York, West Valley, New York. And he talked about how it was pouring contaminated water into the Cattaraugus Creek. Because what happens is, as the fuel rods age, they get little tiny pinholes in them. And so the water, the contaminated, the water goes into it, and it leaks into the system, and it leaks into, it's kind of like as the fuel rods have these little tiny pinholes, the water gets leaked through, the contamination gets leaked through, and it goes through the entire processing system. They do not, in fact, filter out all the pollutants that are coming out of the system. And it's just been poured into the Cattaraugus Creek. So this morning, I decided I was going to look up Nuclear Fuel Services Plant to see if they're still alive. And, they're actually a huge website. They're now in, I think, Tennessee. Of course, the corrupt state of the world here. I mean, that's really kind of where they're at. I guess they had to move out of New York. I don't know. But, the thing is with this, who runs it? A man named James Ferland, Ferland. James Ferland, President and Chief Executive Officer. He holds a bachelor's degree in nuclear engineering from Rensselaer Polytech Institute and a master's in business administration at Darden School of Business Administration at the University of Virginia. He actually has had a big hand in the whole nuclear thing for a long time. He's been an executive for more than 23 years in commercial nuclear power and the utility industry. He served as president of the Americas division of Westinghouse Electric Company. So this is one of the criminals who actually doesn't mind pouring radioactive nuclear contamination into our drinking water. He thinks it's perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. These are the kind of people that we need to write letters to, ask them to rethink their scientific research. You know what? Not that we're probably going to make any difference, because they, as Greg Mello really fully explained, they are fully committed to killing people. They do not care. Tamplin and Goffman are outlining it in this book that I'm reading online, and it has gone up full through today. It is actually a complete outrage. I mean, just yesterday's headlines from E&E News, plutonium-241 from Fukushima, nearly 70,000 times more than the atomic bomb. 70,000 times. these numbers that they throw out, that just kind of blows me away. Doesn't it make you guys think? Like they say 1 trillion, 1 billion times. You know what that tells me? They don't know what the fuck they're talking about. It tells me they're just throwing numbers out like they might as well just, I don't even think they're even calculating it. I think they're just finally admitting it and saying, yes, I mean, I just don't believe them. I don't believe any of the research coming out of the nuclear cartel. They've done nothing but lie and kill all of their entire careers. Anybody attached to, I guess we are in this catch-22 with the nuclear cartel, folks. Because they're the devils that have been fucking killing us for 70 years. They're the devils that have been training young scientific minds and fucking twisting them and convincing them that there's no problem with nuclear radiation. Far, far, far better than coal emissions. And yet, we need those same rat bastards to help us figure out a solution. I mean, this is a really catch-22. These are the minds that actually understand it. I mean, you know what? Maybe they don't. Maybe that's really what it is. Maybe they're just chasing their tails and running so hard, they're hoping that everybody dies before we figure out they don't know what the fuck they're doing. And they have just created a worldwide extinction-level catastrophic event for greed. I mean, could you imagine? There wouldn't be enough fucking pitchforks in this world. I mean, it is beyond comprehension how these people can continue to just ignore it. I mean, Greg Mell went into quite a bit of detail on how the system is set up, how the corruption is deep, deep, deep seated from many years ago, and how there's no room, how they just can't back out. It's like in this book that Tamplin was talking about with the nuclear reactors. The bottom line is, once you're invested in nuclear reactors, you can't really go back. If you shut them down, people, they make sure people go without electricity. And, in some parts of this country, during the winter, that might mean death for a lot of people. So we're invested not just in the nuclear power plants, but we're invested in the fuel rods, and the reprocessing system, the pollution that contaminates. I mean, God forbid for all of our people that live in the east, up by the Great Lakes, which, God forbid, I wonder if anybody's even testing the water in the Great Lakes, because it just doesn't make logical sense that the water in the Great Lakes is not completely full of nuclear pollution. There's just too many nuclear power plants up there. And that's just all there is to it. When we look at what they've been doing, the way they spent fuel rods for years after years. This book that I read last night popped my eyes out. I read a chapter last night, a few pages last night, about the safe disposal of the old fuel rods. Well, there is no safe disposal of the old fuel rods. That's just a complete outrage. This whole double talk, this whole double think, that's what I mean. It brings me back to language. I'm having a really hard time calling myself an anti-nuker because that's a negative affirmation. I want to say something like truth in science, a science truther. I kind of like the idea of calling myself a science truther, a nuclear science truther. They have those like 9/11 truthers, the reasonable people who pay attention to actually the facts, the families of the people who got killed, who got shoved aside by Congress and told to go fuck off, when all the indications are it was being pointed by an inside job called Dick Cheney who planned the whole fucking thing. I've actually only met one person who told me they really believe in the government story. And it's the same bullshit with the nuclear industry. So I don't know. I like the idea of being called a nuclear truther, because that's what we're suffering from. We're suffering from being lied to for 70 fucking years. I mean, seriously, this is a consistent that when I deemed this a 90% rule after I read some of John Goffman's work, when I first started reading John Goffman, at first it was a study, and actually, you know what? 2 years later, I wish I had captured it. I cannot find it. It was a study that John Goffman did of the Japanese people after World War II. He followed them for 20 years when he realized the government was destroying the evidence of the information that they had and making it unavailable. He studied them for 10 years. And he basically said at the end of it, which is why they, bounced him out of the nuclear industry, is that they will lie that nuclear radiation causes harm and deny 90% of the negative effects of radiation. That means they only admit to about 10% of the damage. So when I hear these kind of bullshit stories, 70,000 times larger, what the fuck? Who the fuck, how do they know it's 70,000? I don't believe them at all. They're coming up with these ideas, and I just don't believe them. They're just friggin' liars. I think it's just off the charts. We hear these big, gigantic numbers. Billions of times this, 18 times this. It's like they have one of those clocks where the hands go round and round and round and round, and they're like, they're just fucking off the charts, man. I mean, it's an outrage, and people just continue to believe them. I was speaking to Tim Martin the other day, this man from Eugene who's a salmon fisher. He's just now waking up, and I'll be honest, he's shocked. He cannot believe it. And he's hitting, when I first started talking to him, he's like, no, the salmon's okay. And then I give him a little bit of information. He starts looking, and you know what? He's heartbroken. So we got to find a better term than anti-nuke activists. We're actually rational nuke activists. The rational person says, fuck you to nuclear energy and nuclear everything. And the rational person will say, this is not an industry that ought to be even running. It causes way too much negative effect. So, I put this up on my Facebook page, but I really think that we need to come up with better phrases than just hanging on to that old weather-beaten phrase of anti-nuke activists. When I first got into this and I met Kevin, I saw Kevin on the YouTube channel, and after Carl Grossman told me that everybody should do what they think they can do, I came up with the idea of Kevin having a symposium here in Eugene, and I called him, and he came here, and that's how the whole thing started. And that was in 2013. And, at that time, I did not consider myself an activist. I did not consider myself anything other than just being completely freaked out. And I was convinced that if Kevin could come here and talk to the peace movement that was here in Eugene, because there's a lot of peace activists that live in Eugene, and they are very actively engaged. Or they think they are, I guess they are. I mean, I haven't seen them stop a single fucking war, but they've been doing things. I guess it's that old adage, you keep doing the same thing over and over again is the definition of insanity. That's what I think we got going on with the anti-nuke activist title. We got to come up with something that's energetically stronger than anti-nuke activists, because that's bullshit. I mean, maybe I feel like nuclear truthers. I think that's kind of a catchy phrase. Hopefully someone might come up with a better name, but I'm going to call myself a nuclear truther from now on, because what it really does in my mind, because it kind of links in the idea of the 9/11 truthers, is that it hooks into that kind of idea that there is an underlying conspiracy from the government to fuck us over, just like they did in the 9/11 scenario. 9/11, what did they do the day after 9/11? They rolled out a fucking 1,500-page document called the Patriot Act and shamed Congress into passing it without even fucking reading it. They pressured them. Congress should have had the nerve and the balls to just stand up to those people and say, slow the train down. We're not taking away everybody's freedoms because we got attacked. We're not cowards. But unfortunately, we have a bunch of cowards in Congress. And that's how we're into this scenario 15 fucking years later, with every phone call in the United States being spied on. In fact, every phone call in the entire world being spied on, and everybody going, wow, that's too bad. I mean, 3 nuclear meltdowns happening, and the government doesn't say, oh, my God, protect our people. And people are like, what, Fukushima 4 years later? What, it's not. My family on Facebook, they're like, well, we just can't read your post because it's just too scary. Like, what the fuck? You think it's not any scarier what's happening? It's not like I'm the bringer. I'm not the creator of the fucking news. It's going on whether you want to admit it or not. You can't see, taste, feel, or hear it. You can't. It's not like jumping up and down. You know, what happens is we get sick, we get the flu, the old people die off like flies, our immune systems are weak. You know, children start having weird little ailments that would not have normally have had. Our quality of life diminishes. Animals rolling up on the beaches, and people are like, what the fuck? I don't want to look at it because it's too scary. That's bullshit. All these people, oh, I love the dolphins. Really? Then become a nuclear truther. Start talking about what fucking nuclear really does to the fucking planet and what it is doing to the planet. I am just nonplussed about how people can just sit on their asses and do nothing. I cannot get over 5 people showed up in Salem, Oregon at our protest. Less than 20 people in Portland. When Kevin was down in Diablo Canyon, the Post-Ignorance Project, nobody showed up, maybe 1 or 2 people. I mean, he hooked up for the Mothers for Peace people and walked with them, and it was a great event, but what the fuck? There's enough people listening to this radio show. There's enough people that follow Kevin Blanch on his Facebook page and his posts. It's not enough just to watch the videos and to know the information. It's not enough. It is not enough. Ackerman's making paintings to the detriment of his artistic career. It's not enough for people just to go on with their lives as usual. You know, people say to me, well, how do you do it all? I mean, one of my clients actually said, you know, I'm heading into the throes of tax season. I don't know, many of you know this, but I'm a tax resolution specialist. So around tax time, I get busy. The IRS gets busy. I get busy. I have to do tax returns. One of my clients says, well, we were kind of joking, like, it's kind of funny. I said, well, you know, I got involved in the Post-Ignorance Project very heavily in the last year, a lot more than the year before. I kind of talked to her about Fukushima. She's got a 6-year-old child. And you're living in California, right near the coast. I mean, you know what? Clients like that get scared to death. And guess what? This one was a therapist. A therapist can't even face fucking Fukushima and doesn't want to talk about it. She said, well, aren't you really scared about it? I said, you know what? Getting active in this, to stop the nuclear industry, to make the world aware that this is a worldwide fucking crisis, that all the governments need to get involved. We can't just let it bleed on and go, okay, TEPCO, you're just going to let it poison the entire fucking planet. Sorry. No. We need every major government figuring out how to drop shitloads of concrete. That's the only thing I can think of. I'm not a scientist, but I'd love to hear about that. I haven't heard of a scientist talking about maybe an incomprehensible plan, a gigantic incomprehensible plan. My thought is just dump a bunch of concrete on it and rocks, and I don't know what we have to do from far away, evacuate the area and just start dumping stuff on it. I mean, there has to be a way to fix this frickin' hole and to stop it, at least plug the hole. I mean, I know it's going to fission. I know it's going to be difficult, but you know what? That's what we need to do. This guy, E. James Ferland, he's all about reprocessing. He's from, Westinghouse Electric. He's part of the fucking problem. He is the problem. I mean, if you guys go to the page of Babcock.com and look at his fucking picture, I mean, the guy, seriously, looks completely, he's got this, little corporate picture, and frankly, it scares me. This is a scary person. So, I don't know. Kevin and I are out here. We partnered up in an effort to make the Post-Ignorance a real project so that we could go around the country. I wish I could go around the country with him. But, I can't. I can't just leave my business and go to every single event that's planned by the Post-Ignorance Project. That's just an impossibility. But you know what we can do is get people who are in those areas out into the streets, talking to, and also calling their congressmen, calling their senators, not letting these fuckers get away with it. Just because they say they're going to build a nuclear power plant, I think it was in Kentucky or Tennessee, fuck them, no. Sister Megan Rice is sitting her ass in jail for how long? For a populace who just didn't even show up at her fucking court hearing because they weren't getting paid? Honestly, on this one, I'm completely with Kevin Blanch on this one. Completely with him. Where was Beyond Nuclear? Where were these people at Sister Megan Rice's hearing? Really? Where was Greenpeace? Where was Arnie Gunderson? I mean, if they're not getting paid, they're not going to show up. They can afford to fly there. I mean, she went to jail, and Kevin was the only so-called reporter, and he's not even a reporter as it goes. He was the only one. The Plowshares people were there in court to support her. You know, it is beyond comprehension. The intentional, the intentional willful ignorance of the people who even know about the nuclear problem. And it's still about greed and money. In this book that I was reading this week, we came across a chapter in the population control through nuclear pollution. And this chapter about nuclear reactors. They were talking about how Arthur Tamplin, and this was like in 1969, met a symposium in Minnesota where his thesis was, you know what, these nuclear power plants are dangerous and we ought not to use them. Let's don't get into the technology. We think it could be very dangerous until we understand it a lot better because, you know, it's just, the evidence is that it's extremely unhealthy for everything that it touches. And the people that were running the symposium basically told Tamplin that if you don't take that clause out of your presentation, we will not pay for your tickets. We will not help you get it published. We will not pay for your stay, and we will not help accommodate you. Now, I don't know how much all of that costs. You know, an airplane ticket, several $100s. Publishing a book maybe in 1970 terms. Even if it was a few $1,000s. Even if it was $10,000. And you know what Tamplin did? He took it out. The stupid fucker. I mean, here's a guy who's a scientist who basically helped write this book, Population Control Through Nuclear Pollution. 2 years later, he was at a symposium and agreed to take out the most egregious findings, the most offensive findings to the nuclear cartel. He agreed because he wanted to be at a symposium and wanted them to pay his way. So he was willing to take very vital information out. That's what's wrong with the fucking scientific community. I mean, that is, honestly, this is what we're up against. We're up against nuclear scientists who only give a crap about money. You know, it's really an outrage, you guys. You know, I don't mean to be angry this morning, but you know what? We got to be angry. It's an angry situation. It's not rational just to, like, be fucking calm. Where were people at Sister Megan Rice's sentencing hearing? Where were they? There were people in Kentucky that could have showed up. We could have rallies of people out there. Where the fuck were they? There was nobody there for her. You know, she's rotting in jail. Her partners from the Plowshares Project connect with her. She's not alone. She's well loved. Those people love her. You know, Greg and Michael, they're rotting in jail for much, much longer. Nobody showed up for them. And they're going to rot in jail for longer because they've already been convicted of protesting against the nuclear industry, and they were told not to, and they decided to go do it. They were illegally processing uranium at that nuclear power plant that Megan Rice broke into with Greg and Michael. Like, they stood up for us, and nobody stood up for them. I mean, it is a lonely road, and it does not have to be. People just have to decide that life is worth more than money. It's really getting down to that. Life is not about money, folks. Tell that to Steve fucking Jobs, slave owner Steve Jobs. I mean, if people want to know why I can't do an Apple phone, because the Apple company put a fucking net around its building when the Chinese slaves were jumping out the window to kill themselves. Instead of resolving the labor issues, they put a net around their fucking building. You know, that's the attitude. That is seriously the attitude of these motherfucking capitalists. I mean, they are eating their own arms off, you know, while they're stuffing cake down their face. It's outrageous that people are not outraged. Our words matter. It does matter what we do, what we say, and how we think. For me, facing this stuff gives me courage. You know, my client yesterday says, doesn't doing all this stuff make you afraid? No. I am more afraid to ignore it. In fact, if I have to work for 3 or 4 days in a row and I have to ignore the news at E&E News, and I come back and then you open up okay, so you know I guess what they call the mainstream media, they call E&E News sensationalism because of titles like this. Plutonium from Fukushima, nearly 70,000 times more than the atomic bomb fallout from Japan. Large areas of the ocean contaminated by plutonium from events such as Fukushima. You like that? Such as. These motherfuckers, even when they're telling us they're fucking poisoning us, they won't give us a list of where this shit comes from. I mean, this is real fucking battery. When is the people of this planet going to love themselves enough to stand up to these motherfuckers? That's really what it's about. It's self-love. People do not get off their asses because they don't think they're worth it. And they've given up on their children, and they've given up on their grandchildren. But, you know, it is an outrage. Tim and I are going to put our heads together. We're going to get the salmon tested for him. He's heartbroken. And, we need to start testing our own food. Kevin thinks it doesn't matter, but for sure, you guys, we cannot go to Ken Bessler, what's his name? Ken Buesler, who used to be at the Woods Hole Institute. Now we'll test anything for, you can send him $500 for your water, and he'll test your water. Thanks, Ken. After you spent $2 million at MIT fucking wasting your money to be a pro-nuclear activist, you're one of the fucking motherfuckers who told us 2 years ago that don't worry, there's no radiation from Fukushima. These motherfuckers twist this around. That's fucking gaslighting. Saying one thing, doing another. This is exactly what gaslighting is. It is an outrage. I do not know how people can just sit calmly and just expect us to just sit down and do nothing. You know, Tim was telling me he went to a craft store down off the coast of Oregon, right in between Oregon and California. He went to a craft shop. And the lady told him that the crabs are weird. Like, they're pulling them up first. The harvest is it's only about a third of what it should be. So there's not very much out there. But what they do catch is they catch crabs with no skin on them. Like, how do you have a crab with no skin? Although I don't know crabs very well. But the lady said they don't have any skin on the top layer of them. And that when they break open the females, they're all full of eggs and they're molten when they're not supposed to be. And there's no meat on them. They're very bony. And they're still selling them. And he asked, are they testing them from radiation? You know what they said? That's not their job. He's been run around. He's been really on the hot button trying to figure out because, he's an Oregonians are very proud of the fact that they love their salmon, they love the outdoors, they love the creeks, they love everything that's outdoors. And for them, eating fish, not eating the salmon, people up here say, well, that's our way of life. Well, welcome to the real fucking world. Thank the nuclear industry for fucking destroying your way of life because you continue to eat the salmon, your kids will definitely have cancer, if not you, and or genetic mutations. Look at those 33 children up in Richland, Oregon, right next to the Hanford nuclear power plant, which, by the way, I don't know if you guys were listening last week when I was talking about that Forbes magazine, and I was so flipped out about that scientist. There was actually a head scientist at the, I think it's called USA Ventures, right in Richland, Oregon. Well, Richland, Oregon is right, and that's the city where Hanford is. Outside of Hanford, that's where the workers live. It's called Richland, Oregon. And that is a fucking cancer cluster. We had 32 cases of encephalitis last year. And 2013, the government quickly came in and said, no, not caused by nuclear radiation whatsoever. How can that be? When the fucking radiation is pouring into the river now, it's leaking into the groundwater because fucking Bechtel just poured the nuclear radioactive waste into the dirt without lining it. They're just fucking pouring this shit onto our dear Mother Earth without regard to what it's doing to the ecosystem. They could give a flying fuck whether it kills everything on this planet. I guess because they think they have secluded islands that they can keep out the nuclear radiation. It's unbelievable. Fucking people are insane. I mean, how do you stand up to insane people? You stand up to them. That's how. You find your courage feet, you put them on, and you just stand up and you refuse to take no for an answer. You just, no, we're not doing it. We have only yes. Yes, you will stop nuclear everything. Stop the nuclear reactors, stop the nuclear wars. The nuclear wars is the bullshit about it all. These new wars that they're starting over in Yemen, you think in Yemen they're not dropping depleted uranium bombs all over the fucking place there now? Hell yes, they are. You think they're not doing it all over the Middle East, all over Africa? What do you think they're doing? They're making boatloads of money selling arms. It's an arms race. And it's nuclear arms. It's very subtle, not big, gigantic bombs, but they're selling depleted uranium weapons, which is illegal. But, the United States they don't care. They make the fucking rules. They seriously don't care. They will kill every single person that gets in their way. They don't care. They killed Michael Hastings. They killed Aaron Schwartz, and I don't believe that Aaron Schwartz hung himself voluntarily. I think that's a bullshit lie. Just like Michael Hastings didn't take drugs and fucking hit a tree. If that was the truth, then why did the LAPD have to cover up the fucking bomb site with a cloth? Have you ever seen the LAPD go to a crime scene where a car got wrapped around a tree, and they decided to cover up a part of the car that somehow got mangled, not by the tree? Like, people just choose to ignore the fucking fact. This is the deal. It's called, we really need to be post-ignorance, folks. Like, if you know about Fukushima, you know about the nuclear cartel, you're listening to this radio show, you are post-ignorant. And it is your responsibility to A, admit your ignorance. Admit what you don't know. B, make a commitment to go understand what you don't know. We can find it out. The good thing about ignorance is it can be cured. We don't have to remain ignorant. Humans are an incredible creature. We have a capacity to do a lot of things. What's going on in our planet now is we have a bunch of debilitated humans who have been convinced by this system that they are insignificant and illiterate and they can't learn and, it doesn't matter. And just listen to what we tell you because we're going to tell you what you really need to know. People need to love themselves enough, love their children. It's about love. Self-love will cure us. Love for our planet will cure us, will give us the courage to stand up in the face of these monumentally rich motherfuckers who threaten our fucking lives. I personally, if they want to kill me and martyr me and I become an insignificant person in history, then my life has been well served because that means I'm beginning to threaten them. Because they only know violence, because the nuclear industry is violence. That's what Arthur Tamplin and John Goffman, that's what they're really highlighting in this book, that the nuclear industry are just violent murderers. They knew since the early 70s, in fact, they knew since the early 60s when the studies were definitive. I mean, hardcore definitive. Linus Pauling won a Peace Prize for discovering that, for really definitively stating, nuclear causes massive problems, and we ought not to use it. That's why they started to end the Cold War. They were like, well, we've got to shut this whole nuclear thing down because, the evidence was monumentally gigantic. If they kept up, we wouldn't have a planet. So instead of shutting down the fucking industry and just bringing it, scaling it back and taking it out of the public purview and studying it for the next fucking 100 years, which is what they should have done, which was what it was recommended by every scientist working on the project at the end of the project. They said, we shouldn't put this into the public use. We need to study it. It's going to take us a long time to study. But the profit was way too tempting. The way they set it up is that the taxpayers pay for the nuclear power industry. More than 80% of our Department of Energy budget goes for nuclear, still to this day. You know, and then if there's a nuclear accident, if anybody who was out at 3 Mile Island found out, they will lie to you without repercussions. I was stunned when Libby Hill Lady said that at 3 Mile Island, people were not warned. I mean, I was dumbfounded. I was a little child during that time. I did not hear it. I mean, I was young. I think, in the beginning, I must have been 8th or 9th grade, something like that. I was a teenager. And it just seemed like something far away, and we were told by the government that don't worry, it's being taken care of. Now I'm on the West Coast. I wasn't out there. So it didn't affect us as we were told. But then again, I was living out by San Onofre and didn't even know that thing was a fucking nuclear power plant. So when I met Kevin and he started talking about the post-ignorance project, I'm like, that's probably for me. And you know what? It's probably for 99% of the American public. We are the 99%. The post-ignorant people, I guess it's called the pre-ignorant or the ignorant project, That's the 99%. We're trying to get to make 99% of the populace post-ignorant. And the only way we're going to do that is for all of us who are listening to get actively engaged, do our own research, band together, support each other, and bring out the nuclear lives. It's the only way that we're going to stop them. We can't just say nothing and expect it to get better. If we continue to say nothing, it's really only going to get worse. It's unconscionable that people are sitting on their asses. I'm not kidding you. People ask me, well, how do you do it all? Well, really, it's about saving the fucking planet. And yeah, I bust my ass. I go to work every day. I work late. And I still have time to read. I still have time to do You know what an old boss said to me a long time ago about time? Don't tell me we don't have time to do things, because time is a human invention. So you have all the time in the world. It's a matter of, do you want to do it? And for people to say, well, I don't have time, I'm too busy. No, you're not. The thing is, you're too afraid. You don't want to face it. You don't want your comfortable little life to get uncomfortable, because tell you what, it's uncomfortable. When I first got engaged in this, so for a long time, I sort of hung out in the background. I didn't want Kevin to talk about me. I didn't want anybody to know who I was. I was like, it's enough that I'm helping support you moving around the country, but I was afraid of our government. I've already been falsely investigated by the government. In 2009, I called up Mike Pence's office and told him I didn't agree with his vote to not fund unemployment benefits for the homeless people, for the unemployed in 2009. Someone from his office called the Capitol Police and said I threatened to murder them, which subsequently got a fucking investigation against me and blah, blah, long story short. Nothing happened, but those fucking people tried to intimidate me. And that's the bullshit that will happen. But you know what? They can't take anything from me. There isn't anything they can do other than my life. And if I give up my life trying to save the planet, then I've lived an honorable life. And that's where I'm at. We need to be willing to live for our planet. And that means live fully. And that means make changes in our lives to pay attention to the fucking news. The quote news, that's an interesting concept, isn't it? We get this news, and if it was news, that means yesterday it's old. This is historical data that's just being thrown out. We're just being slammed. It is incomprehensible. And then when you think about it, with the nuclear cartel, their whole thesis, we don't even know the industries that they're trying to use the nuclear waste in. And honestly, I have been way too busy in the last few months to find out this piece of legislation. I'm pretty sure the last time I paid attention to it, it got taken off of the purview of the House. But there was legislation to use this as a nuclear waste in our utensils and in our dishware. Seriously? No doubt somebody from ALEC wrote the legislation. No doubt. It's an outrage that people don't even know the legislation that's going on in our government. We're just letting them slowly chip away at our lives, at our rights, like the Patriot Act. Here I am 15 years later, and I think I'm the only person who still calls it the Unpatriot Act. It's the Unpatriot Act. It's not the Patriot Act. It's the Unpatriot Act. It's the Traitor Act. It's the Treason Act. It's a traitor, Bush and Cheney. And I'm going to call them traitors. They are straight-out traitors. They're not respected politicians. Cheney is a murderer. Bush is a murderer. And yeah, you know what? Obama's joined them because he's the obedient slave. All those drones in Yemen killing children. I mean, karma is a bitch. And when the shit hits the fan in this country, people are going to be crying, we don't deserve this. Well, maybe we do. Because people refuse to get off their asses. When the debris started hitting the shores of the Oregon coast, what they do, this was so fucking offensive. They flew in teenagers from fucking Fukushima to clean off the radioactive fucking debris. Because they said, oh, it's not radioactive. Really? Floating across the ocean, there are plumes of radioactivity, it's not going to come up there? It's such an outrage. The decision to just ignore it all, the decision to not face it, it's a decision. People make a decision to walk away from this. We can't walk away from it, because guess what? You might want to ignore Fukushima, but Fukushima is not going to ignore you. It's like all those people living up in Richland, right? They work there. The lowest person up in Richland, the lowest person who works up at the Hanford nuclear power plant makes shitloads more money than they would ever make anywhere else. And they think the company's going to take care of them. And then once they realize they're not going to, they realize how they've been contaminated. But I don't know if any of you have seen those videos of that, of those people that are suffering from it. The families are coming out. They go catatonic. They work there for 40 years. They start getting sick. The company denies it. In fact, there's sick people up there all the time that we never hear about. And I mean, ambulances come and haul them away from the Hanford site. It is not a safe site. Just like the WIPP is not taken care of. That, waste processing plant down in near Carlsbad, New Mexico, that collapsed. They're just moving ahead. They're just going to keep going. They don't have the answers, and they've decided they're not spending the money on it. Linda Levy reported a number stuck out in my head yesterday when I listened to her show twice yesterday. It had so much information. Something that stuck in my head was that these nuclear power plants make $1 million a day. That's $365 million a year. And they don't have the fucking money to figure out how to harness this waste, how to bury it. I mean, they probably do know, but they don't want to spend the money. It's about not spending money. They're going to kill the planet because they don't want to spend the money. I'm off the charts incomprehensibly, like dumbfounded. The news is not better. I mean, creatures are just rushing onto the shores of the banks of the United States of America. And people are sitting on their asses still. What was that other story on E&E News? Bazillions of crab-like things washed ashore. Really? Bazillions? I guess that's the Orange County Register deciding that they're going to describe it. Dead sea creatures washing up on the shores of Orange County, and people are saying, oh, it's global warming. Perfect timing for the nuclear industry, isn't it? To time the fucking blowing up of Fukushima, just ignore it. There's a documentary on YouTube that I saw a few years ago. It's called, what was it called? an Arctic death spiral and the methane time bomb, and it talks about how their projections for the methane, the escaping methane from the bottom of the ocean, is way off, and by the end of 2015, we will have no ice in the summer at the Arctic, and if that happens, we cannot stop the death spiral of the methane escaping from the bottom of the ocean, of which I think there's like, what they say, 8 gigatons off of the coast of Russia. 80 gigatons of methane about to explode. What do you think those big gaping holes are off of Russia? I mean, my theory is that Fukushima just put all that stuff on Balco and made it a million times worse. It's super important, folks. Like, it's not good enough just to be post-ignorant and to go, yeah, wow, that's really bad. All of us have to figure out a way to get active. All of us have to do something. You know, I personally think we need to continue. Ron Wyden's office hates me. You know, at least Jeff Merkley's office is still nice. But, you know, we need to call them up and you know, tell them we expect them to stop this thing. And, of course, they won't talk to us because it's been put under the Unpatriot Act. It's now a state secret like it is in Japan. So you call your senator, you call your congressman, they're going to be mum's the word on this, and they're not going to talk jack shit to you. That does not mean you cannot still call them. So, you know, I encourage everybody to get as active as you can. You know, support the Post-Ignorance Project, support data, support the people that are out there bringing us the real information. And you know what? I don't know. I guess we're all just grasping at straws because it is getting critical here. 4 years, folks, of 3 nuclear meltdowns going unchecked, and people want to act like it's just another industrial accident. No, it's not just another fucking industrial accident. It's a catastrophic accident that's being ignored. You know, once people get active and re-engaged, they will get their courage up, just like I did. You get your courage. Courage is built slowly by realizing that you're not going to fall down the first time you stand up, and if you fall down, you can get back up. By dodging the fucking bullets, and we are dodging bullets. But it's vitally crucial for all of us to get actively engaged. They stopped 3 Mile Island. They didn't tell the people about it. We're hearing news. They're just not telling us the truth. They're slowly eking out the truth that we're completely fucked. So it's not just about learning how to mitigate from radiation. I think it's super important for us to get out and find a way to get active. And I personally, one of my things of activity is finding a new name. I refuse to call myself an anti-nuker. I am not an anti-nuker. I'm a nuclear truther. That's what that is. Nuclear truth means talking about the real science that Arthur Tamplin and John Zoffman have certified. Their real information, not the vital information that was taken out of every symposium, every scientific paper, because they were threatened in one way or another. We need the scientists to keep the dangerous information still in their journal, in their scholarly papers. It's off the charts. The corruption is so deep, but it's going to take the scientists to get some courage, and that's only going to happen if we encourage them. You know, and courage. We need to give them courage. We need to give them the courage to stand up to the nuclear cartel. I mean, maybe what it's going to take is for the fucking economy to totally collapse, because if they don't have any money, if money means nothing, then their fucking $300,000 a year doesn't mean jack shit. And we'll all be suffering. Maybe then they'll come out with the truth. We'll have people in our country working for the banks for free like they did in Russia for fucking years. People went to work in Russia without being paid. When their economy collapsed, when their dollar collapsed, they just went to work because they knew if they didn't, the system would fall apart. Maybe that's what it's going to take. When that happens, maybe we can get the nuclear scientists to tell the truth. You know, I just throw out these ideas, folks. It's not set in stone. I'm obviously not the big scientist type, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that plutonium, 70,000 times the plutonium-241. Plutonium-241 lasts for 14 years. That's the half-life, folks. Keep that in mind. We're not even near the half-life of plutonium-241, 70,000 times higher in the Pacific Ocean. So, thanks to everybody for listening to our Post-Ignorance Project show here today. I believe that Kevin will be on the next radio show. I'll find out when he comes up for air.
All hands on deck, all hands on deck, all hands on deck. All nuclear fighters, all hands on deck, all hands on deck, all hands on deck. They'll be calling you a radical. Twin Gate 311.